so let's get started. So today we're going to discuss the Bash shell and Linux operating system. So why are we going to discuss these things? Well, like I said in the previous lecture, sort of 90% of all computational packages in scientific computing are written for Linux, and a large proportion of those packages do not have nice graphical user interfaces, and so the way you talk to them and get them to do the jobs that you want is through the command line interface or the bash shell. And so if you want to do any sort of reasonable computational material science and engineering, you need to be familiar with Linux and bash. And so I appreciate that not everybody is, and so the first part of this course is getting folks up to speed on those things and getting a level of comfort that will allow them to actually use the codes that we will be looking at throughout this course. Okay, so let's start with Linux. So what the heck is Linux? So Linux is an operating system developed by Linus Torvalds in 1991. Its mascot is that little penguin called Tux. It's based on Unix. So Unix was an operating system developed by Bell Labs. It was initially free due to a legal loophole, and so eventually Bell Labs closed the loophole and allowed them to start charging for Unix. And so that really gave birth to a group of programmers who wanted to develop an alternative to Unix that could be freely adopted by folks outside of Bell Labs. And so Linux was born in response to that. And so there are many distributions of Linux. If you're a Linux geek, you'll hear that they're called distros. And so Fedora, Red Hat, CentOS, Debian, Ubuntu, these are all common flavors or distributions of the Linux operating system. So like I said, it's free and open source, and you can interact with Linux in two ways. So you can interact via the graphical desktop environment, so through a nice graphical user interface or GUI, or via the command lines, the command line interface, the CLI. And so we're going to interact with it via both of those methods. And so you're probably going to be pretty familiar with the GDE or the GUI. It's fairly intuitive, point and click. Really the important part for scientific computing is getting more familiar with the command line. Okay, so Linux, like I said, developed by Bell Labs. It's really the best of both worlds in that you have this nice intuitive graphical user interface, but you also have access under the hood via the command line interface to all of the sort of powerful parts of Linux. So you can really get deep into the guts of it and do sort of important system level tasks, automate things, access source code, do some scripting to systematize your common tasks in the computer. Okay, and so really it's used everywhere in scientific computing. 90% of supercomputers run it, including Blue Waters, which is the supercomputer here on campus. If you have an Android phone, actually the Android operating system is based on Linux kernel, and the Ubuntu distribution is the most popular operating system in the world. Okay, so what if you don't like Linux? And what if you really want to use Windows or Mac OS X? So it might be possible. So depending on the particular computational package that you're using, it may be supported on Mac OS or on Windows. Mac OS X is actually built on an operating system called Darwin, which is very similar to Linux, and so that's can be a double-edged sword. Because it's similar to Linux, you may have Linux software that works pretty well on Mac OS X, or you may have software that doesn't work, and it's very difficult to figure out why, because these two systems are so similar. Windows is a different story. So if you have a software that is designed for Linux, installing on Windows will, I can almost guarantee you, be exceedingly painful. So you can get sort of Linux emulators such as Cygwin that you can run on Microsoft Windows that you can then maybe install your Linux software onto there. But I promise you it's not going to be fun and it's not going to be easy. And so perhaps the right way to think about the introduction to Linux in this course is one of the learning objectives for this class, is to get you familiar with Linux, get you comfortable with Linux, such that you can then start using it for various computational material science and engineering applications. So don't think about trying to run the software that I'm going to show you in this class on the operating system you're most comfortable with. Make it one of your objectives to really get to grips and get comfortable with Linux. So get comfortable with being uncomfortable using Linux, using the command line. Okay, And so what distribution are we using here? So the computer is in front of you. The engineering workstations are running Scientific Linux 6, 64-bit. So it doesn't particularly matter what flavor they're running. But I'm just trying to show you a screenshot here where you can see all the nice GUI stuff at the top, and so all the point-and-click stuff. And then down at the bottom, I've opened a bash shell, so you can have the command line interface active at the bottom there that allows you to access all the stuff under the hood, right down at the low level of the operating system. Okay, and so much for Linux. So you're going to be using Linux, you're going to be getting practice, getting comfortable with Linux, but the important part of Linux is really the bash shell. Probably you can all handle the graphical desktop environment pretty easily if you're familiar with Mac OS X or Windows. It's all very intuitive, point and click. The more difficult part to get to grips with if you've never seen it before is the bash shell. Okay, and so the command line interface. So it's an alternative way to interact with the machine as opposed to the graphical desktop environment. And so switching to a command line interface can be very intimidating for new users. So it looks kind of scary. You open up this sort of text box. It's this black screen with white writing. It kind of looks like the movies from back in the 50s when people were working on these big computers and there was no nice graphical interface. It was all sort of typing stuff into a terminal. So I'm going to tell you, don't be intimidated. Once you know a very small number of commands, that allows you to interact very efficiently with the command line interface, and you'll get to grips with it and get comfortable with it very quickly. And you'll actually find it to be a much more powerful, concise, and in some cases efficient way of interacting with your operating system as opposed to the nice GUI you may be more familiar with. So one of the real fortes of the command line interface is scripting. And so you can write little programs, basically scripts, that just run a series of commands in your command line interface that allow you to automate tasks in a very sort of powerful and efficient way. So for example, imagine it was your job as part of a class project or as part of your job to download 1,500 daily NASDAQ stock quotes. And so if you were to do that using the graphical desktop environment, you would perhaps navigate to Yahoo Finance's webpage and point and click to download all of these 1,500 files. So exceedingly tedious, exceedingly painful. With the command line interface, you can write a short little script that will navigate the command line to the Yahoo Finance FTP server, and you can tell it to download all these 1,500 daily stock prices every morning at a particular time, save them in a particular manner, and do it all in about 3 seconds. And so it's an extremely fast, powerful, and efficient way of doing sort of these repetitive automated tasks. And so one of the things we're going to do as part of this course is write a little script to run DFT calculations at different lattice spacings in an automated manner. So we have our aluminum crystal. We want to study what is the energy of this aluminum crystal at different lattice spacings, and so we can actually use bash to call our DFT software package, tell the software package what lattice spaces we care about, run the software, pull out the answer, and put that in a nice file for us. And so it's a very powerful way to automate computational science and engineering. Okay, and so the command line interpreter goes by various names. You'll hear it called the CLI, or a shell, or even just a terminal. And so basically the right way to think about this is it converts text input, which you type through the keyboard, into operating system commands. And so there are various shells. The most common one is the bash shell, which sort of stands for the born again shell. But there are various flavors. So there's the regular shell, the corn shell, and some other ones. The bash shell is sort of the most popular and prevalent, and is the default one on many on most Linux distributions. Okay, and so now we're going to get on to actually exposing you to the command line interface and getting you to start using some basic commands in the bash shell. And so how I want you to think about the remainder of this lecture is basically as a library. And so what I'm going to do is present to you common, important bash commands, what the command is, what the command does. And so I just want you to make you aware of these commands, and you should think of this lecture as serving as an overview of what the bash shell can do, and a sort of library where you can look back and look up the command that you need to do a particular job at a later date. So that's to say, I don't want you to sort of memorize all these things. I'm never going to test you on these things. I just want to provide you in a sort of single repository all of the important bash commands, and a nice friendly place to look back and figure out what command you need to do a particular job. Okay, so let's open up a Bash terminal on our Linux workstations, and so I'm going to go back a couple slides just for a second to the screenshot I had. Okay, so up at the top there, you'll see a little icon. So this guy right here, so this is a shortcut to opening up a Bash shell. You can also get to this by going to the Applications menu, System Tools, and in here I think it's called Terminal. So it's one of those two ways you can open up a Bash shell. Okay, so let's go back to where we were. So I'm going to open one up on my Macintosh, and so it looks a little bit different, but it's exactly the same thing. Okay, so this is my Bash shell. Okay, so what are some of the basic commands that you need to know? And so perhaps the simplest command is pwd, so present working directory. So if you type pwd and hit enter, it tells you where you are, so where your current active directory is. So just like in a graphical desktop environment, you move around between directories. It's the same for the Bash shell, and so you need to move around between directories within the command line interface. Okay, so now we know where we are using pwd. You can hit ls, and that will give you a listing of the contents of the current directory. So I'm currently living in /users/alf, and this is a listing of all the different files and directories that live within this directory. So for most Bash commands, you can modify the baseline command by passing it some flags. And so what I'm showing you here is a modification of the ls command to make it do something a little fancier. And so you always pass these flags, these modifiers, with the dash or the minus sign, followed with some letters. And so what I'm telling ls to do here is list all the contents, even the hidden contents of the current directory, in a long form and using human readable file sizes. So if I hit ls-alh, you'll see it lists the files and the folders in a different way. And so we've listed them in long form. You can see each one has attached to it the size of the directory or the file, and you can see that it's also listed some hidden files that the ls command didn't pick up. Okay, and so how do you know what flags you can pass to a particular command? So almost all Bash commands have a manual page associated with them. So if you type man and then the command name, it pops up the manual for that command. So this is just a text file stored on your computer somewhere, and you can pull it up to look at the various commands that are supported, the various arguments that are supported for a particular command. So we're going to talk about this text viewer later, but basically, just to give you the punchline now, spacebar takes you down, so you're scrolling down through the file. The B key takes you back up, stands for back, so going back up through the file, and Q escapes you. So if you have an unfamiliar command, you can type man, command name, hit enter, you'll get the manual page for it. Okay, so what about if you don't want to list the contents of your current directory? You can actually pass an argument to the ls command, which is a path. And so perhaps you wanted to list the contents of this particular path. So maybe I want to list the contents of, say, my volumes folder. So I would do ls/volumes, and it would tell me what's living in /volumes. Okay, so much for telling me where I am, pwd, and telling me what exists there. What about if I want to move around? And so that's a cd command, change directory. And so cd takes an argument, so that argument could be a path. So I could do cd/volumes and change into the volumes directory. Or I could do sort of change directory, and this is going to take me to my desktop. And so now I'm back on the desktop. You can also navigate up and down your file hierarchy using this special little double dot. So single dot is actually shorthand for current directory. So if I do ls single dot, it will give me a listing of the files in the current directory, and ls double dot will give me a listing of the files in the directory right above me, so the mother directory, the containing directory. Similarly, if you do cd double dot, that takes you up one level. So I'm in /users/alf. then maybe I want to navigate down into Dropbox. So I'm going to CD down there. See, I've moved down into Dropbox. Now I do CD double dot. I come back into /user/app. Okay, and then you can string them together. So you could do double dot slash double dot, and that will take you up 2 levels rather than just take you up 1. Okay, so then we can find out where we are, we can see what exists there, and we can do a little bit of navigation. So what about if we want to make new files and directories? And so the touch command actually makes a brand new file. So you can do touch myfile.txt, and in the current directory it will appear a new file called myfile.txt. Similarly, you can make a directory doing mkdir and then the directory name. So for example, let's change it to my desktop. And let's do mkdir mydir. Then if I hit ls, you can see that mydir has appeared. And I can navigate into mydir, and then maybe I want to make a file called readme.txt using the touch command, and so readme.txt has appeared. So when you create files and directories, you need to be aware that they can have different permissions. And so maybe you are able to read and write to a particular file, but the rest of the world cannot. So that's sort of the natural options is that you have on your own particular system have read, write, and execute privileges, but the rest of the world maybe only has read and execute privileges. Okay, and so how do you control the permissions to a file? Well, it's through this chmod command, change mode. And so this takes 2 arguments. The first is a 3-digit number, and the second is the file. And so the 3-digit number tells the operating system what permissions you want to attach to that file. And so the first digit corresponds to what permissions you have as the user. The second digit corresponds to what privileges the rest of your group has, so the work group that you exist in. And the third digit is the rest of the world. And each one of these takes on a different value, specifying what permissions, what privileges that group should have. So in this particular example, 755 corresponds to the user having read, write, and execute privileges, and the group and the rest of the world only having read and execute privileges, so they can't write to that file. And so how do you know what digit to put in each of these 3 slots? Okay, so there's an easy trick. And so the way we do this trick is to think about that if you want to give read access, that takes the value 4. If you want to give write access, that takes the value 2. And if you want to give execute access, that has the value 1. And if you want to combine these things, you add them together. So if you want to give yourself read access, you would do change mode 4. If you want to give yourself read and write access, you would give yourself change mode 6. And if you want to give yourself read and execute, that would be change mode 5. And if you want to give yourself read, write, and execute, that would be 4, 5, 6, 7. So that's the way to remember that. So again, you don't have to memorize this by heart. You just come and look at this slide. And if you sort of compile some code and you want your friend to be able to run that code, you might want to give them execute permissions on the executable. And so you might do change mode 755 on the executable for the code. So the 2 most common 3-digit codes are 755, which typically you want to assign to executable files, and 644, which is just read and write access for you, and just read access for the rest of the world and your user group, which is sort of for non-executable files. Okay, so what I'm trying to convey here is that you can make files and directories, and you can assign permissions to those files and directories. So we can also assign variables. And so why might one want to do that? Well, imagine, to continue our example, we want to run through a variety of different lattice spacings for aluminum and compute the cohesive energy using some DFT calculation. So we might automate that process using a bash script. So we might have some variable lat param, which is a lattice parameter. And we might, as our first state point, assign sort of 4.2 angstroms. Okay, so I've assigned 4.2 to this variable lat param. You can then use the echo command, which just means sort of echo or print to the screen whatever I give to it. So if you echo, my name is Andy, it will echo that to the screen. Similarly, you can echo the value of variables, so it lets you find out what the value of the variable is. So putting this $sign in front of the variable dereferences the variable and echoes you the value. If you forget the $sign, it's just going to echo the text. And so for the variable, the value of a variable you're after, don't forget to put the dollar in there. Okay, so we will return to that when we need it. Okay, so just maybe a couple more slides and then we'll finish up for today. And so if you have an executable living in your directory and you actually want to execute it, so this might be the executable for a DFT program or a molecular dynamics code, the way you execute a file is to just type into the bash terminal its path. And so formally, you might want to type in its entire path. So this might, /user /local /bin, then the name of the executable file. But if you actually have your command line interface directly in the directory where the executable resides, you can use the shortcut. So dot, you'll remember, just means my current directory. And then within that current directory, the name of this file. Okay, and so when we actually get to using molecular dynamics and DFT codes, we'll be executing these things all the time, and so we'll get some practice doing that. And so let's look in my directory. So imagine we make an executable called exec. Okay, so exec lives in there. We might want to change the mode to 755 exec to give us read, write, and execute privileges, and give the rest of the world read and execute privileges. So now to execute this, you could just do exec, hit enter, and if this were an executable, it would run. Or alternatively, we could give it the full name, and so what directory are we in? So you could do users /al desktop dir exec. So you could type that, hit enter, and that would also do execute the code. Okay, so a couple of other commands. Which, and then type in the command name, gives you the location of that command. So if you've sort of lost where the ls command lives, or you want to know where the pwd command lives, so where that actual thing lives on your system, you can type in this. If your terminal is starting to get a little crazy with too much text, you can type clear and hit enter to clear all the text on your terminal. Okay, this wget command is a pretty powerful command. It allows your command line interface to interface with the internet. And so basically you can use this command to download web pages, download files from file servers, basically interact with the web, provided you have an active internet connection. And so one of the ways we're going to use this is actually to download software installers. And so we're going to do wget. The argument is going to be the URL of some file we want to download. And we want to tell wget to -o, so output to a particular file. And so if you type this into your terminal, what I've stored in this link here is a wonderful picture of me, and you're going to be able to download that picture and write it to a file called myprof.png. And so if you want to type this in, if you download this from Compass, you can grab this, paste that into the terminal. And so wget has sort of gone to the internet and downloaded this image. And so you can see this thing called myprof exists here. And so if I actually open up my directory in the GDE, you can see it's downloaded this picture. Okay, so wonderful. Okay, so maybe last slide for today. And so, okay, so you can use the command line interface to navigate. You can see where you are using pwd. You can list the contents of the directory using ls. You can make files and directories. You can download files and directories. So now what about if you want to copy or remove things? And so these are very common commands you're going to use all the time. And so CP stands for copy. And so you copy a source file to a target. So maybe you want to copy a file called myfile in your current directory, and you want to copy it to a location /app/doc. And so this would copy my file and into /app/doc, and then once you execute that command, you can navigate here and see that there's a copy of this file in that location. If you want to copy directories, you need to pass an extra special little flag that stands for recursive. And so basically this copies not only the directory itself, but everything in it. And so the very common mistake, you try and copy a directory, you forget this flag, the bash shell will complain and say, okay, it's a directory, I can't do this. You need to copy recursively. So imagine you want to copy a directory called mydir and everything in it to the location, current directory, go down one level to dir1, down another level to dir2, and you want to copy it into here. So you need to make sure and pass the -r flag in order to copy all the contents of the directory. So similarly, you may want to move things, so very similar to copying, but it actually deletes the original. And so it moves a file or directory from one location to another. And in this case, you don't need to worry about the -r flag. Okay, final command for today, very important command, but also very dangerous command, the remove command, so rm. So if you hit rm file, it's going to remove this file. And it's not like just dragging something into the trash in your GUI or your GDE. It actually deletes this thing forever. It's irrecoverable after you've executed this command. And so be very careful using this command. If you're a little worried about deleting something and you don't know whether you really should delete it forever or not, perhaps a way of sort of at least telling yourself you intend to delete the file but postponing it to a later date is to maybe append to the file name _trash or something like that. So maybe you want to delete some file called myfile. So maybe instead of doing rm myfile, you could do mv myfile _trash. So for example, maybe I want to delete rm myprof.png, but I'm a little worried, I don't want to delete it forever. So maybe for now, I'm just going to do move myprof.png to myprof.png _trash. And so now it's sort of appended with _trash, and maybe once I'm a little more confident later that I really don't need the file, I can delete it forever. Okay, and so like the cp command, if you want to remove a directory, you need to pass the -r flag in order to remove everything within the directory recursively. Okay, so I think that'll do it for today. Next time we're going to pick back up with some more bash commands. And like I said, don't worry about memorizing all this stuff. Think about this as a library, a reference material to come back and look at. Really, I'm just trying to give you an appreciation of how to use and get comfortable with the bash shell. And these are the commands you're going to use frequently when you start using bash. Okay, so maybe if you have time either now or this evening, I recommend maybe you spend sort of 5 minutes, 10 minutes just playing with these commands, moving around the directory hierarchy, creating some files and directories, moving them, copying them, just starting to get comfortable with using the bash shell. And next time we'll get on to slightly more advanced commands. Okay, thanks very much, guys.